All right, welcome. So this is Breakout Session C. Who deserves to eat? Drug war exclusion and the fight for basic supports. Back-to-back sessions here, dealing with the fallout and the damage for our many decades-long drug war that's produced mass incarceration and the world's worst overdose death rate, right? Mm-hmm. Fantastic success, drug war. Yeah, give yourself a pat on the back. But I'll let the presenters introduce themselves. We will have time at the end for Q&A. It is being recorded, though, so make sure if you have a question, I'll come around with the mic at the end.
Thanks so much. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Well, hi, y'all. Good afternoon. I'm Hanna Sharif-Kazemi, and I am a policy manager at Drug Policy Alliance's Office of Federal Affairs. I'm really excited to be in this space with you. I'm really excited about these two panelists, too. Before we get into it, maybe Yasmeen, Monsies, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself and where you're from?
Hello, everyone. My name is Monsies Franco. I was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. I currently live in Minneapolis. I am a justice-impacted individual. I currently work for Hennepin Healthcare Research Institute at the Health, Homelessness, and Criminal Justice Lab, where I serve as a senior community-engaged research coordinator.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if y'all can hear me. Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Yasmeen Covington. I'm originally from New York. I currently reside in North Carolina, Charlotte.
That's great. Amazing. Well, thanks y'all again for being here. Before we dive into today's session, I just want to take a few moments to introduce the organization that I work for, as well as just provide a brief overview of what today's session will look like. So the Drug Policy Alliance is the leading organization in the U.S. working to end the drug war and repair its harms. And at DPA, I lead the campaign to repeal a federal lifetime ban imposed on individuals convicted of a drug felony from receiving SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps. And this is the policy that is really going to be at the center of today's conversation. And so today's session will first examine how the war on drugs is not just about drugs. It's not just about mass incarceration, right? The drug war is also a war on people and functions so that people are still locked up years after they have actually left the prison walls, right? And so prison and the drug war show up in people's jobs, they show up in people's relationships, but they also even show up on people's dinner tables. And you might be asking, like, why am I in Minnesota if I work in a federal office? Minnesota has historically had one of the harshest SNAP drug felony bans in the country. And I started talking to folks like the folks at MNJRC to be like, hey, are you aware of this? And a lot of folks had no idea that this existed. So that's one of the goals of today's conversation, spread awareness about what this policy has looked like and does look like in Minnesota. And also, I think y'all should also know that the end of this policy is near and is soon, and one of the main gatekeepers to actually seeing this get done at the federal level is your senator, Senator Klobuchar. So I think there's a lot to discuss here about like the relevancy of Minnesota as well as just like the range of possibilities that exist, right? So with all of this in mind, today's session will begin with me just giving a very brief presentation about how we got here. So in other words, I'm going to provide a brief roadmap on how the war on drugs came to infiltrate our public welfare system and our SNAP system. And then I'll also provide some background on the SNAP drug felony ban policy, what it looks like at the federal level, the national level, but also at the state level in Minnesota, as well as just give you all an update about the national ban. But while I'll talk about, just what this work looks like, I think the thing I'm really excited about is the panel discussion with Yasmeen and Monsies, which we'll get into after my brief presentation. So we can make sure and have a conversation about what can we build in place of this policy, right? Just thinking about the themes of this conference. And how do we make sure that people are able to have food on the table regardless of their conviction and regardless of their relationship to drugs? So with that, let's get started. So again, there's so much I could say about the war on drugs, public welfare, the history, but something that I think is really important to acknowledge first and foremost is that the line between medicines and illicit drugs in this country have always been blurry, and most importantly has been racialized, right? So we deem some substance use as legitimate and sanctioned, like alcohol and caffeine, while other drugs are demonized and stigmatized. So here you can see these clips of the two highly most demonized drugs today, heroin and cocaine. They were treated as medicines 100 years ago. Then here is a really great example of white supremacy shaping our earliest drug laws as well. So this example, just really briefly, when Chinese immigrants came to California in the 1850s to work in gold mines and then the railroads, it was believed that they also brought opium smoking, right? So the government was claiming that white folks were going into these opium dens, getting addicted, and then that's when we started seeing cities and states pass the first anti-drug laws and anti-opium laws, even though historians have found that people in the US were using opium far before this migration, right? But associating Chinese immigrants with opium allowed white people to mark Chinese immigrants as others. And in other words, drugs were just a vehicle to pass xenophobic, anti-Chinese, and anti-Asian laws. Classically, this pattern continues around 60 years later. So on the left, we have a New York Times headline from 1914, right before the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. So y'all can see the kind of messaging and framing and who the laws were supposed to be responding and addressing. And then on the right, we also see the strategic use of the word marijuana instead of cannabis to associate anti-Mexican rhetoric, right, with anti-Mexican laws. And these sentiments and rationales on the right essentially are what led to the Mexican Marijuana Tax Act passed in 1937, which is effectively what made marijuana illegal. And most famously, when people think about the war on drugs, they think about this rather than the slides I presented on earlier, right? So in 1971, President Nixon declared his drug war, and we know it was not about the drugs, right? Nixon's own aide admitted to the following. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, we could raid their homes, we could break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, right? And folks know about the devastating impact that the war on drugs has had. We have over 1 million arrests are made for drug law violations in the US each year. Most of those folks that are arrested are black and brown folks, even though white people and black people use drugs at similar rates. And then here, of the nearly 2 million people currently locked up in the US, 1 in 5 is locked up for a drug offense. But nearly 75% of folks in federal prison and almost 55% of people in state prison for drug offenses are black or Latinx. And so the reason why I want to provide that brief framing is because I think it's really important context for when we think about how did the drug war infiltrate our public welfare system. So formerly incarcerated folks not only have to face time behind bars, is what I'm trying to say, right? Once they're out, they also face hurdles that are essentially lifetime sentences and can be lifetime sentences to poverty. And it was really in the 1990s, which, I know a lot of folks refer to as the era of many things, tough on crime, et cetera. But it was also a period of the development and proliferation of collateral consequences that formerly incarcerated folks have to face in various systems outside of the criminal legal one, including our public welfare system. And so in the 1990s, the war on drugs was providing a rationale for states to begin limiting access to public benefits in the name of deterring drug involvement, right? And the assumptions behind that thinking were things like we need to control the welfare queens. That was an image that was really going on in the media at that time. We're seeing crack babies. And so with those media narratives that were going on and on every night at that period were certain assumptions, like some people deserve help, others don't, right? People are just trying to game the system and squander public money, and people who use drugs can't be responsible community members. And so in thinking about how those narratives were fed night after night, there was this idea in our country that we've begun to accept and enforce the idea that people who commit a crime trade away their civil standing and their rights to certain things for the rest of their life. And as welfare was a thing that was being talked about a lot, there was a notion that there is no inherent right to housing, to food, to health care. These are all things that the state has to deem that you've earned, right? And if you do something that society deems as inappropriate, such as using drugs, there's an understanding that we can revoke your access to those things, the very things that you even need in order to survive. And so here with this image, we see President Clinton in 1996 signing what was called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, otherwise known as Welfare Overhaul. President Clinton at the signing said his intention of signing this bill was to end welfare as we know it. And he made clear in his signing who the bill was meant to address, right? So here you can see he's flanked by two black women, and he had them publicly take responsibility for their poverty at the signing. Yeah. And in that massive piece of legislation, there were various provisions around collateral consequences, which really gave the permission to the drug war to widen their nets, right? To begin punishing and controlling other parts of people's lives and that the system didn't have access to prior. And this included the food on their table. And one of the collateral consequences within the welfare overhaul legislation was what we call the SNAP drug felony ban. How many folks in this room know what that is? Just also for okay. The usual suspects. Got it. Cool. So I will go into it. So while they were developing this big welfare overhaul legislation, at the very last minute in the Senate, a Republican senator from Texas proposed, why don't we just ban SNAP and TANF for people with drug felony convictions? And after only 2 minutes of discussion, it was included in the final package, signed into law. And so while this ban exists at the federal level, it does give states the option to opt out or to modify their ban. So what modify means is they can deny you SNAP, also known as food stamps, if you comply with certain expectations, right? So in one state, you have to wait 10 years before you can apply for SNAP. In another state, if you have a certain type of conviction or a number of drug felonies, you're just banned for life. If you don't complete treatment, you're banned for life. And this is just varies by the states that have those modified bans. So currently in the U.S., 28 states have completely opted out of the ban. They don't have a SNAP drug felony ban, but 22 states still impose that modified ban. 21 states. And then one state, South Carolina, is the only one that still has this lifetime ban. So in South Carolina, if you have one drug felony conviction, doesn't matter, you're banned from food stamps for the rest of your life. And we'll get into in our panel discussion of what that actually means, what's that impact on folks' lives, et cetera. And so now I want to zoom into Minnesota, right? So as I told y'all, the reason why I'm here is because I was talking to so many folks about hey, did you know, I've been having these conversations with folks for 3 years, and I was like, did you know that this policy exists? And almost all of them were like, I had no idea that was a thing. And these are folks that worked in reentry. These were formerly incarcerated folks. These were folks working in treatment, all the positions where you would hope that they would know something like that, right? And so Minnesota had that really strict modified ban until recently, and we'll get into what the modified ban looks like in a minute. But just for some background, in Minnesota, the unlawful possession of most controlled substances except marijuana, and also except for first offenses with small quantities, is a felony punishable by law. And you can see here around 16,471 people had drug-related arrests in Minnesota. And there were many versions of what the drug felony ban looked like in Minnesota, right? So first, in Minnesota, you were subject to random drug testing for 10 years. And then if you tested positive for drugs twice, that's it, you're done, you're banned for life. Then there was a reform made to it. If people with drug felony convictions if they failed a drug test, they were just required to receive information about drug treatment options. But again, they were expected to complete drug testing for 10 years. And recently, in this last August, I think in August of 2023, the SNAP drug felony ban was repealed, but the statute still poses some problems that I want everyone in this room to be aware of and what our panel discussion will get into. So I have the actual statute here, but long story short, drug testing, it's still on the table. Folks can still be called into random drug testing if they're on SNAP and if they have a drug felony conviction. And actually this month, Minnesota updated the SNAP state manual. And they said and affirmed that random drug testing is optional. Agencies must decide whether to require such testing. And it's great and all that they still say, like, please don't terminate SNAP assistance for folks, and any disqualifications before, the new statute came into place. But something I'm thinking about is what Kayla said during lunch about, is that reform, like the deep architecture that still exists of like having people still taking time out of their days, of their lives when they're supposed to be re-entering and they want to put food on the tables, like, is that really a reform? That's something we'll get into with our panelists. And the very last thing I'll say, just for y'all's awareness, is we're so close to getting this repealed at the federal level, which is really exciting. For the first time ever, there is bipartisan support. We're trying to get it included in something called the Farm Bill, which is basically the largest piece of federal legislation for food and farming. It's passed every 5 years. And excitingly, our bill that repeals the SNAP drug felony ban is included in 3 out of 4 Farm Bill proposals on the table. So this is great. So we're sounding the alarm to Minnesotans, like, y'all are not in the clear yet with the drug testing, but this is what the national level is about to experience. And so now I want to get into our panel discussion with Yasmeen and Monsies. So the purpose of why I outlined everything I outlined is because, I think it's important for us to think about how the war on drugs doesn't just affect our criminal legal system, right? And also, I'm just talking about SNAP. Like, it also impacts other forms of welfare benefits. It goes into our immigration system. It goes into our education system. It's everywhere. It's rampant. And I really what my hope for the panel discussion is for us to just think about, what does this actually mean in people's lives? Even this reform in Minnesota, what does this mean for people, right? Everything I've presented on are just historical facts. They're statistics. They're text on a slide. And in order for all of us to really feel the impact and understand how this impacts folks with drug felonies, I think it's really important that we begin putting flesh to those numbers and really think about what's at stake, right? And so we're now at my favorite part, the panel discussion. Yasmeen, Monsies. They're so brilliant. I'm excited for you to learn from their brilliance. But I think my first question, I know I asked y'all to really briefly introduce yourselves, but I want to know why and how you got into this work and what led you to being in this stage. So I'll start with you, Monsies.
Thank you very much. I come from that lived experience. I am a third-generation incarcerated adult, and as one of my female cousins put it, some families go into the military, our family went to jail or prison. And growing up in a cycle of incarceration, my work is to break generational patterns that exist, and so that is my role in the work that I do with criminal justice reform.
I guess I'll introduce myself a little more. Like I said, I'm originally from New York. Got into trouble in New York. Arrested, drug felony charge. Kind of got tired of New York, needed a change. I was finding myself in a lot of trouble. My parents were already living in North Carolina, Charlotte. So my mom is just like, come down. I have a 10-year-old son. She's like, come on down, you and him. So I moved down there, and of course the first thing I do is apply to get a state ID, as well as I applied to go for food stamps. Because I said I don't have a job yet, so I got to contribute something inside my parents' household, because it's not just me, it's also me and my son. So I knew that from New York, EBT provides food as well. They also provide an educational portion to it where you can get certified in things through food stamps. So I figured that what I know about it from home, I can utilize it in Charlotte. But no, I was stopped in my tracks. I got denied 4 times for EBT due to my record. I didn't finally get approved for EBT until I applied for a full case, meaning cash assistance and all of that stuff. And I honestly didn't need the cash assistance, because then by the 4th time, I already found myself a little job, but I still needed the food side because I couldn't afford food for me and my son off of that. So when I went into the office, I asked a few questions about different things that I knew about SNAP and just about DSS. And the first things that I was said to me was asking of how do I know about these things. So that just said to me, if the caseworker is saying that, that means that they're not informing their people in Charlotte the opportunities that they can have through SNAP. They're wanting their people to get the full public assistance, instead of saying, hey, you can use SNAP to get certified in HHA or CNA or this or that. So I got partially approved, where I only get for my son due to my record. So it just made me feel like, was this the right choice to move down here? Because I'm trying to get away from something, or I'm trying to start and have a fresh new life to move somewhere where I feel like it's always like a speed bump stopping me from something. If it's not a job with a background check, it's something with EBT due to the fact of you having a drug charge on your record. And like the whole testing, you taking a test in order for you to keep your benefits, that was like out the question. Like, I gotta come here and take a drug test every time. How do you explain that to your job? That means that now you're putting your job in your business. And it's like, this is personal. This has nothing to do with my 9 to 5. So it just made me feel, I wouldn't say less than, but it just made me feel like, what kind of mess y'all have going on here? Like, what's going on here? And I'm just assuming living in New York or born and raised in New York, everywhere is like New York. This is 2022 when I moved to Charlotte. So I'm thinking we in 2022. Like, why are y'all still stuck in the 50s? Why New York City is like evolving? Like, so that's my story, situation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yasmeen. I think you really get to a lot. I mean, there's so many problems with this policy, but I think you really touched on a lot in just your story, right? Like how it affected your dreams and goals for yourself in moving to North Carolina, how it's affecting, like also being said, hey, you can get SNAP if you're just subject to random drug testing, like what that does to you emotionally, as well as like all of the daunting tasks that would pose for your day-to-day life and trying to rebuild your life in North Carolina and bills. And Monsies, I know that we've talked about drug testing a lot in the past couple of weeks. And I was curious to hear about, to whatever extent you're comfortable sharing your experience in reentry, the ways that SNAP has helped you, if anything at all. But also, I know that you've also had some experience with drug testing as well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, there was a couple of pieces of my story that I left out. You mentioned welfare queens. My mother was one, quote unquote. But I grew up below the federal poverty line, and people who commit crimes just don't wake up and decide, I want to be a criminal. There's a lot of surrounding factors that happen and adverse childhood experiences. Mine in particular are domestic violence and homelessness and parents with substance use, dependency, and so, as I mentioned, being a third-generation incarcerated adult, that was tacked into some early problem-solving skills that benefited me once upon a time when I was looking at the world through a survival lens. I've been incarcerated. I've been involved in the incarceration system since I was a kid. Since a teenager, I was certified as an adult at 17. My earliest involvement is 13 and 14, and it just continued in a pattern in that way, leading up to prison and being released in 2018. And as you were talking about navigating reentry, there's a host of surrounding circumstances to my own reentry, one being released to transitional housing, which by federal definition is homelessness, and not knowing where I was even going until less than a week before exiting or to my release date. And so I navigated the systems. I was fortunate enough to not be impacted by the SNAP ban, so I was able to receive SNAP benefits. And I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to go without even my mother on welfare. The food wasn't always enough. Through EBT or food stamps back then, the paper food stamps that were color coordinated, that I remember vividly. And so my reentry process was navigating housing, it was finding a job, and in the interim, I applied for SNAP benefits so that my goals and dreams of not recidivating or not going back into the carceral system would come into fruition. Because I, just like a lot of people, had a lot of high hopes and dreams about making change and doing something different. I didn't know how I was going to get there. I didn't know what that was going to involve, but I decided to embark on this journey of change, and I was poured into along the way by good people. Applying for those SNAP benefits really benefited me in a way because it took out the likelihood of me walking into a store and stealing food, because the truth, as plain as it is, that I've lived that way. I've done that, and those are crimes of poverty. And we're really talking about collateral consequences for crimes of poverty that exist. And so the SNAP benefits, which helped me during my transitional period, also being on supervision, relating to urine analysis tests. My conviction wasn't a drug conviction, but I was still subject to random testing. I, just like many other people, were rejected application after application from employment, and so I found myself in the temporary agency looking for work, and there were 2 to 3 times when I was called in to do a UA, and I had to let this temporary agency know that I had to leave because I have an order and to leave, to complete this by the end of the day, and my work day competes and interferes with those times that were available for drug testing. And so, the first time they understood, the last time they didn't. I mean, I was at about 80-something days out of 90 before they were supposed to hire you, because it's that 90 days to hire. They said, that's fine, you can go. I get a call from the temporary agency that said, they don't want you back, And so at that time, I was heartbroken because after rejection, navigating transitional housing, using SNAP benefits just to get by, I didn't know what I was going to do next. Hindsight is 20/20. I realized those doors closed so other ones could open, which I'm fortunate for. But at the time, I didn't realize that, and it just seemed like another rejection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think a lot of the things I'm holding right now are just like, once you re-enter, all the barriers that are up there. And this is just one of, I think in the US, there's like 40,000 collateral consequences in total, and it can really feel that way. And your story, I think, really speaks to that. And it's just thinking about, I'm so glad that you were able to access SNAP. And I think both of your stories together paint a really interesting portrait of like what someone in Minnesota that has a drug felony that might be randomly drug tested has to face, right? They might face barriers to accessing SNAP. And this kind of goes into my next question. Like, in order for someone to receive SNAP, it's at the mercy of an agency and of discretion. And I know that that's something we've talked a lot about, and I would love to bring that conversation here. Whoever wants to start first can, but I really want us to interrogate what are the dangers of discretion here? Like, let me just go back to, like, there's lots of you may be subject to random drug testing, and then agencies must decide whether to require such testing. What are some of the dangers there for folks in reentry?
So I'll say in Charlotte, something I do know is that the caseworker can waive for you to get the SNAP or not. So now the choice is on the caseworker. If the caseworker said, hey, I'm gonna clear the zone and let you get it. Because I'll say for me, my crime wasn't committed in North Carolina. It wasn't committed in Charlotte. It was committed in New York. So for whatever reason, in North Carolina system, they can see that I have a record. And I had a caseworker say to me that she shouldn't be able to see that. So now the fact that, okay, that's there in the open, she sees it, she has an option to say, hey, I'm going to give you the stamps. Or she can be like, I'm not risking my job like she said to me. I'm not risking my job like all the other caseworkers do. So it even goes to the extent of probation. In North Carolina, you have to pay. Your probation officer can waive the fee for your probation. So it's even on that, the probation officer deciding if they want to waive something or not. So it's like they're picking and choosing who they want to give stuff to. And it make me question, because I say to myself, you're picking and choosing, so who you giving it to? Like, what do a person have to do? A person have to look hungry, or like, do they have to look a certain way, or is it a certain skin color? What is it that's making you say, okay, I'm gonna give it to you, but I'm not gonna give it to you. But I'm gonna give it to you, but I ain't gonna give it to you. What is it? Because it's like, it make a person feel like, forget your stamps, I'm going back to know what I know how to do. Or you're just fighting it and you're dealing with it and saying, okay, I'm just going to live paycheck to paycheck until I can find myself a better situation or more money or whatever. And then I'll say, too, you have, in Charlotte, you do have, like, the soup kitchens and, like, the pantries where they hand out food. The line be so long for the food pantry, that's even discouraging. So it just show you how many people aren't even able to have food stamps, that they're on the line for the pantry, and the pantry is like wrapping around the corner. So you're like, I'm not standing on this line. I'm not messing around with the crap inside this office. So it puts people in a bad position. Like, it's either they're going to go back to doing the negative things that they were doing in order to put stuff on the table, or like I said, you're dealing with the craziness. You're allowing them to stress you out just to be able to eat. And it's like, why? Especially in a state that's a bunch of farmland, where a lot of their natural resources come out of the state. A place where a lot of supermarkets get their food and their produce from the farmers in the state. So it don't even make sense why food is being denied in North Carolina, period. It shouldn't be denied nowhere, period. But it don't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. So it's like...
Yeah. Thank you for that, Yasmeen. The danger of discretion is that it kicks the door wide open for predatory practices.
Yep.
And if we look at systems and we look at the data that's collected, look at the people that are impacted, and they're largely black and brown in number, disproportionately impacted by these systems at play. So now we're leaving one more thing to discretion. And as Yasmeen was hinting, do they look at you and do they say, yeah, you're worthy of these food stamps, or do they look at you and say, no, I don't think you're going to ever change or contribute positively to society? And if we look at systemic racism, if we look at conscious and unconscious biases, this is a storm of disaster that is heading the way of families. And families are being impacted by being able to put food on the table. And the danger of discretion is showing up on what's for dinner, what's for lunch, and what's for breakfast. And this also impacts family reunification and family systems, and like the further separation that involves. I personally have family members with drug convictions who are female that transferred custody over to their mother because they wouldn't be able to receive the benefits, but their mother would. And so now you're further detaching mothers from children based on a criminal offense or a moment in time. And truth be told, a large percentage of women, it's not their drugs that they're holding. It's for some person in their life, you know, and in my family situation, that was the exact scenario. And these scenarios are being played out and continue with lifetime consequences. And this reform, you know, hopefully it's swift, hopefully it's soon, hopefully it's on the way, because we do not need to leave it up to discretion. We do not need it to be left up to another biases or some other systemic factor that is going to negatively impact a mother or a father or a caretaker.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that. There's so much wisdom there, like something just from recency bias, Monsies, like you were talking about, like the entanglement again of the systems, like family separation, the SNAP ban, being in reentry, you know, not necessarily using the drugs yourself, but holding the drugs and then being caught and ensnared in the criminal legal system. And that lifetime impact is really sticking out to me. And also just like you said, sorry, I'm just still processing, but like the possibilities of having the trajectory of your life, right, be switched in a different direction just based on who is seeing you at that time, whether it's your SNAP state agency, caseworker, if it's your corrections, you know, probation person. There's just lots of room that can dictate exactly like where your life and where your reentry will go and what exactly that will look like. This is a question I did not prep you for, but something that I'm thinking of in your reentry. So I'm trying to get at the theme of the conference of like pivoting to possibility, reimagining. Like in my ideal world that I'm trying to build every day, this ban and the 40,000 other collateral consequences don't exist. But I'm wondering if maybe y'all could speak to what you felt like you needed. It can be related to SNAP. Like, was SNAP even efficient for the kinds of food that you wanted to put on the table for yourself or your loved ones? The training programs associated with SNAP. But I would love to hear just what you felt like you needed and what we can do within our movement work to build, you know, the infrastructure that's needed for you to actually get your needs met.
Yeah, for me, SNAP benefits were a bare minimum, and they helped me to afford the food that essentially makes people sick. I mean, if you think about Little Debbie's, you know, and if you think about what is accessible to neighborhoods and communities that I lived in, there wasn't healthy food around the corner. I lived in a food desert, you know, without a grocery store for miles apart. And so, you know, I'm on a hot Cheeto diet, I'm on a microwave burrito diet, you know, and I'm taking all of these things in, because there are means of survival. They weren't the type of foods that made me feel good after eating or energized me, you know. And if you want the more expensive food, then that means that's the less food that you have for months. Because my transitional period between like coming out and getting a job was 2.5 months to 3 months. And so in that interim, you know, there was a gap there that, you know, I didn't have a source of income coming in besides the SNAP benefits. And again, I didn't have a family system that was set up to support me through housing or financially, you know. And so those were the types of situations that people like me and others have experienced and are currently experiencing.
For me, SNAP helps my household because alone in my house we're spending over $600 a month in groceries. So my pickup is on the 5th. 2 weeks from that, I'm back at the supermarket spending another $200-300. So now SNAP is, to me, doing that was helping my dad out because my mom doesn't work. My mom is a housewife. So my dad is doing everything in the house. So I can't sit here and expect for my dad. I'm grown. So I don't expect for him to take care of me, but I know as far as his grandchild, he's going to help me with. And I don't expect for my dad to do that. So if I can take something off his load, groceries. He can keep more of that to his pocket and do what he want to do. So SNAP definitely came and helped for that. And then, like I say, as far as even now, I get $292. It's something. Something is better than nothing. That's how I look at it. And with that, that's more than enough to just buy my son his things that he needs for school and just for the house alone. And then if anything is left over, I may hold on to it and buy sandwiches and stuff through the week for myself. So it definitely helps out. And then on the educational side, I mean, when I was living in New York, SNAP paid for me to get my security license. It paid for my fire guard and all of that stuff for me to be able to have a job and make decent pay in New York. So it was like, it definitely came in handy, knowing those sides of things of it and not having to go like, I grew up watching girls do the back to work program just to have their rent being paid by welfare. And it's like, why? You make more money working for somebody than sitting here and messing around with welfare all the way to that extent. So it's like, I could take the little help. I need it. I don't mind it. So it definitely does something for my household. It definitely helps out tremendously, I could say that.
What I want to highlight in this conversation is that you're looking at proud people, people who want to contribute to their own family, to their own household, and to society. You're not looking at people who want to cheat the system out of $293 or $186 in my case per month, you know. And so this is by no means a way to advance in society. This is a means of survival. And we're really talking about everyday people in front of you who are tackled by these problems that exist through the SNAP ban and the TFAN ban and this quote unquote reform leaving 10 years drug testing in Minnesota at the discretion of some person who knows nothing about the content of your character.
That's right. No, thank y'all so much for that. Like, I think your answers are, I'm just still sitting with, like, there's still limitations in SNAP, right? In terms of like the food, especially if you live in food deserts, like what does that mean in the types of foods you're able to nourish yourself with and how to feel. But also you're absolutely right in that it is necessary for survival, especially in the critical, you know, months after being released from inside the prison walls. I think we have 5 more minutes before questions, and I want my last question to again be reflective of the theme of the conference today. What is our call to action for folks in this room, given that there is dangers of discretion. We have some folks working in corrections, we have advocates, law enforcement, directly impacted folks in this room, researchers. Now that folks in this room know that this exists, do you have any ideas for how to move forward in building this world where folks don't need to just survive, but they can thrive and live full, beautiful lives?
Yeah, I'll go first. Just as I did not have intimate knowledge about the band that existed when you all contacted me, I might have heard about it, but I didn't have the full knowledge or the full weight of it. And as we looked around the room, and when you asked people who knew, like 4 people I was counting, knew, and you identified them as the usual suspects.
Because I know them.
And so lack of knowledge or lack of awareness, and so what I would like to task each and every person in this room is to tell 2 people about what's happening here. And if you're going to move past telling 2 people, write Amy Klobuchar and show the support that is available. Write your legislative person in your district and raise awareness to this issue, and don't let it die. And we're really talking about, people being able to eat here, which is fundamental and should be a right.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Monty, because I'll say in Charlotte, people aren't informed. People don't have a clue on the certain laws and things that were created decades ago, or they're just, like I said to one of my friends, y'all just exist here. Y'all living in a city and a state, and y'all don't even have a clue on the laws and things that are against y'all. Y'all just coexist here and just go with the flow of things. And when it's thrown at you, that's when y'all like, since when? When was it like that? And it's been like that since like the 50s or 60s. So it's just about informing your people, because coming from New York, you're informed all day. It's like somebody standing on a corner handing out flyers about something. Or it's like certain neighborhoods you go in, like I'm from the Bronx. 161st Street is where all the courthouses and stuff is at. So when you're outside on 161, it's somebody handing out flyers like, you're a felon, you need a job, you need this, you need that. It's the constant informing. And if it's not that, it's just people on the street just giving you the jewels to things. Versus living in Charlotte, it's like the jewels is a secret. It's like they pick and choose who they want to tell. So like I said to you earlier, Monty, like, I work in a gas station. I work in an area that's like in between where it's the city and it start getting ugly. So it's a lot of young boys that come inside my store, and I'll be like, I'll notice they got an ankle monitor on. What are you on house arrest for? Oh, well, it's hard out here. You don't know about Goodwill University. What's Goodwill University? These people are born and raised here. Goodwill University is on Wilkerson Boulevard next door to Charlotte's airport. It's a big building like this. How do you not know it exists? They don't know that there's free classes in there. They don't know that if they take classes, they'll get a stipends every week for taking the classes. They don't know about CEO. The only way they know about it is if probation make them go CEO. But just them taking it as an option of their own and saying, hey, I'm going to go CEO. They're going to help me. They're going to put money in my pocket every day. As well, they're going to help me build a resume. They're going to help me get snapped. They're going to help me da-da-da-da-da. They don't know about these things. Everything is a secret in Charlotte, it feels like. Even me living there, I've been living there for 2 years, and I'm still trying to maneuver and figure Charlotte out. And it's like, even when I ask people certain questions about things, it's a secret. So it's like, how can people... The informing people is not like a strong factor there. It's like only selective people know. Or even with incarceration, like guys that's up north in New York, when it's that time to slowly come home, they're getting set up to probation and the halfway house and the shelter. All of that is coming in line for them so that when they come home, this is the places they'll be heading to. Where in Charlotte, I've met guys and heard stories where this is not even a thought or a clue of being told to them. They may don't find out until they hit the halfway house, hey, you can get snapped. Or the whole time they're in the halfway house, they don't know nothing about it. especially people who's been locked up for 20 years and 25 years. They definitely don't know about what's going on now. So I feel like it's all about spreading the word. Like, people are scared. I don't know if people are scared or if people, it's like taboo to spread the word or something. It's like, no, you're giving up too much information. Be quiet, stay shut. It's just, I always say, growing up north and living in the south is two different worlds. What we were taught and told up north is completely different than what people were taught and told in the south. And I'm getting that exposure by just living there now and seeing, like, I'm in a whole nother world. Was this the right decision to come to here? And I shouldn't feel like that. I honestly shouldn't.
No.
Yep. I'm going to put on my interpreter hat for 1 second. And those that don't understand New York lingo, when Yasmeen was listing the resources for young folks, and she said, da-da-da-da, that just means et cetera.
Wait, I love that. Yeah, I was just going to follow up.
Center of Employment Opportunities.
Yeah.
That's CEO.
Everyone should know, largest
Yeah.
reentry service provider in the country. No, thank you both so much. That was really generative. I'm thinking about a lot, and I think a huge takeaway is, like, aside from when the SNAP drug felony ban, hopefully, knock on wood, is repealed one day, there's so much work to do.
Yeah.
And around, like, removing the bricks of this massive wall that we call collateral consequences of conviction. So I think we have a little less than 10 minutes for Q&A if folks have any questions for me or the panelists.
Yeah, and I'll come around with Mike. And it is, I was thinking about the messaging, too. When I lived in Ohio, liberal Republican state senator came out with "Let's drug test all welfare recipients," right? And criminal justice reform group, this group was like, "Man, that's insane," and it was probably the most popular thing he ever did.
Yeah.
Church groups,
Yeah.
social workers, NAACP, they all lined up behind it. We
Yeah.
just got steamrolled, man. So
Yeah.
something's not working. I think we went with Fourth Amendment. Turns out nobody gives a shit about the Fourth Amendment, right? But they thought they were caring for people. That's
Yeah.
and he was able to take the high ground, right?
Yeah.
So, questions? Yeah.
My name is Thomas, proud member of Lakudere Ojibwe. This conversation makes me feel grateful for my ancestors, fighting for our treaty rights to fish and hunt. Because up north, where I work for Regional Native Public Defense, which represents tribal members in criminal court, and we see not obviously we have food problems, but the housing problem too is there's a lot of HUD housing up there, and not only can someone not get HUD housing up there, but their family members, if they're convicted of a crime, they can't even live in that house with the parent.
That's right.
So once they get out of the transitional housing, they have nowhere to go. And then, I mean, if you don't have a house, you can't hunt and fish. You can't. So I don't know if you guys know of, is there any type of initiative like this that is fighting for to get rid of that, because that's something that I see every day. I've worked for Regional Native for 10 years, and there's people that come in my office just to stay warm. So, yeah.
That's right. Melissa, I feel like you know the HUD rule stuff more than I do. That's my colleague, Melissa. She's great.
Hi, I'm
Director of Civil
Melissa with
Systems.
Drug Policy Alliance. I'm happy to talk with you more after, but shortly there has been a multi-year effort to push HUD to change those rules, just recognizing how incredibly harmful it is. And there's actually a rulemaking process that's underway right now. We're awaiting any day the final rule to be issued and codified before the end of this administration. It's called Removing Barriers for Justice-Impacted People to Access Public Housing. And one of the things it would require is for people to not just be automatically banned in the way that they are right now, but for there to have to be an individualized assessment. So also you can't, agencies and private housing purveyors for Section 8 and vouchers wouldn't be able to just automatically deny somebody, and that there be only a 3-year look-back window, so that it wouldn't just be like on and on for the rest of your life. Recognizing even that is really tough. But there are a few other things involved in it too, and happy to link you with the effort on it.
I do have one more comment, just quick. I feel like with this food thing, it's just like it's just set up to like control. I mean, so when natives got their hunting and fishing rights, they just went out and killed all the buffalo. You know what I mean? And then when they started giving them commodities, it was just unhealthy. Now we have some of the highest diabetes rates in the country. You know, here's some free food, but it's gonna make you sick. So, I just this was an important issue, and I want to thank you guys for bringing this.
I also feel like too, not just spending it at the supermarket, but it also affects your farmer too. Because you can take your snaps and your wick to a farmer or at the farmer's market and spend it there. Because I lived in Yonkers at the time, and the farmer's market was every Saturday. They would come outside by the church, and they would take cash, EBT, and wick. So it's like, it's affecting their money flow too. So it's like, if they're not, you got the regular person that's coming to spend money, but it's more EBT people there going to them, or WIC people going to them over the regular person. So it's like, now you messing up the farmer's pocket. How is he or she going to continue farming to be able to produce goods and stuff like that for the neighborhood or for the area? So it's like you're controlling in every dynamic. Because it's like, I look at it too, like as a farmer, they're not paying taxes. So it's like, how can you mess with them and dip into their pockets and control their situation? So it's like controlling, they're trying to control all of us.
That's really the theme of this presentation. Control, racism, etc.
And thanks for touching on what you are seeing in your community. And as we talked about, being impacted by SNAP benefits is family separation. So is the HUD housing, and that's a symptom of the larger problem, which is left over from mass incarceration, the war on drugs, Jim Crow, slavery, and the genocide of Native peoples.
Yep, that's right.
My name is Muniratu. I'm here with the Minneapolis Youth Congress. And so I know you guys touched on like what would be a call to action for everybody that's here. But me as a youth or someone that's still in high school, I'm wondering like how we can get involved, specifically like with the policy that's going to be passed and how like we can get in contact with our senator.
I love this question because I was going to, as my concluding remarks, be like, my call to action is. So as an update, as of this morning, this farm bill that I talked about, it's being given a 1-year extension. Amy Klobuchar is going to officially be in power about what's in it. She has not supported repealing the SNAP drug felony ban yet. I've met with her office a number of times, whatever. I think it's really important that her constituents hear from her, hear from you, right? And hear from all of y'all and about your support of repealing the SNAP drug felony ban at the federal level. So happy to connect after and exchange information. But really anyone that wants to get involved should be at the table, especially constituents, because ultimately it's their job to first and foremost listen to y'all rather than a drug policy reformer in DC, right? So it's called the Restore Act. We're trying to get it included in the Farm Bill. Yeah, and if you want a link after, happy to exchange information and for more ways to get involved.
All right, thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.